Hello, I'm David Hauser, and our topic today is the harmony of the Gospels. And so to fit it into a single presentation, I just called it The Thread That Runs So True. And it comes from an old folk song that kids in the mountain region of Kentucky used to sing years ago. It's called The Needle's Eye. The first line was, "The needle's eye that does supply the thread that runs so true. Many a bow have I let go because I wanted you." And it seemed appropriate. God is inviting us to learn more about Christ, and the harmony of the Gospels will do just that. I provided two handouts today. One is a chart in box form that has the necessary passages from the Synoptic Gospels that deal primarily with the paralytic story, the one that was lowered through the roof. It's a famous story. And I think the second helpful handout would be an overview in graphic form, linear form of the events in the Gospels at this larger portion of which the paralytic story is a part. So the overview of the harmony of the Gospels, there are some important things to keep in mind when you're reading the Gospels. And first of all, the part one, there are features of the historical narrative. There are 4 Gospels, but there is one narrative. The focus that we should have in reading the Gospels is the history in the text, not the history of the text. And the process to keep that focus in line is to place the events on the timeline, say the timeline, because there's only one. And part 2 is detecting the narrative flow. That is, this is where you get to enjoy the timeline. And I give you some examples here shortly: the temptations of Christ, and then the healing of the paralytic. And our goal is to be able to trust the chronological order to reveal the true harmony, or put another way, that you can believe your eyes when things follow one after the other. The historical narrative, there's a central concept. We use the word narrative today in a political environment, Republican narrative and Democratic narrative. That means they have twisted or angled or guided the reader to ignore something, cancel it, and go straight forward with their view of how things are. But the Gospels, we have one person telling the story. That's God. And he puts it in a chronological order. It is a narrative that's true to history. The events are chronologically ordered is the first thing, including speech. A lot of people will be glad to have a harmony as long as we don't have to deal with what is said by people in the stories. A well-formed narrative makes it possible to work out the chronological order with minimum difficulty. This is actually a definition of the value and meaning of a narrative. A well-formed narrative makes it possible to work out the I guess there are chronological problems that have to be worked out with minimum difficulty. And this is from Bernard Comrie in his Cambridge pamphlet, his booklet, Tense, on page 28. And as a personal note, I found this to be the case. I found this to be true throughout the Gospels. So that's what a narrative, are the Gospels a well-formed narrative? That would be one of your first thoughts. And the answer might be yes, because God has arranged it. But is also to be tested. And so as a personal matter, I found this to be true throughout the Gospels. Now, the Gospels are 4 narratives, but there's one historical chronology. A narrative provides the context for cause and effect. It's how children learn, and that was written for us. Historical narrative, a first central passage. When I was at school, we had central passages, and we have now a couple here for this. The first central passage is Luke's prologue. It has this to say about all the Gospels. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, it seemed fitting for me as well. He's a Me Too gospel. Having investigated everything, in reality, the everything is gender neutral. It can mean everyone. Having invested everyone, all of them, carefully from the beginning, to write it out for you in consecutive order, and that's kathexes, order, most excellent Theophilus. I should make a note, he had to write it out in consecutive order. It's not dealing with oral tradition here. His is not a compilation of oral tradition. He's writing it out so it can be understood. So, a key term here, the word kathexes. In Acts 10 and 11, we have an illustration of what it means. In Acts 10 and 11, we have parallel accounts of a heavenly vision given to Cornelius the centurion. I'm sure you remember that story there. In Acts 11, because of the circumstances of Cornelius not being Jewish, Peter gives a careful recounting of the same events in orderly sequence. Well, there's our word again. By the same writer, Luke, Acts 11:4. Every point that Peter narrates, and there are 12 of them, matches one for one with the actual historical chronological sequence found in Acts 10. Now, he had a skeptical audience. They were going to be challenging him, and so he made sure what he is telling them matches what happened, because they're going to interview Cornelius too. This is not going to be just take my word for it. Now, his prologue also has this to say about the benefits of the gospel's written form and consecutive order, that you'll have greater assurance about the things you have been taught. People are not comfortable in reading the gospels when they run into things that don't sound the same. Seems to be the opposite. He's saying the opposite. You'll have greater assurance when you figure things out. It seemed fitting for me as well to write it out for you in consecutive order, that's our word, so that you might know the exact truth or the greater assurance about the things that you have been taught. So, historical narrative then assists exactitude. The temptations of Christ in the wilderness is a good place to start and test this idea. There are two series of temptations. In Luke, we have the bread, the mountain, and the temple. That's the order of the temptations we read. In Matthew, we have bread and temple and mountain. You don't need a seeing eye dog to figure out these are not the same right off the bat. However, if you know that the events on the timeline have to follow one after the other, then you can arrange them and see what happens. The same series chronologically integrated. We have Luke, Matthew. So we have bread, and then mountain, and then temple, and then mountain. You might ask, well, what's the big deal? Well, guess which one's his favorite? It's right there, the one he repeats. And he led him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in Luke. And in Matthew, we have a very important word. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world. So again means again. Now, we move along. And the historical narrative then needs a timeline so that you can talk about when things happened. I had a friend make a PowerPoint for me to illustrate this, and I asked, what are all these letters? And they are January, February, March, April, May, June, July, and that's the calendar. Oh, I see. And then he broke it up according to the years that we're looking at. So we have to have a timeline, at least something to go by. And then we have significant seasonal events that inform the narrative. In our case, Passovers, like 4th of July for us. We have something that matters to the Jewish people every year. And it occurs at different points. The calendar that we run by doesn't always match up exact week per day. In the next year, 365 days a year, things move over here. But it's still that same time of the year, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 going by this calendar reconstruction. You'll have to take my word for it only for today. You can check it out later. Now, we add index events then, and also we have further subdivisions. The Capernaum tours, I could ask you for a raise of hands, but I don't think I can see them out there. So the Capernaum tours, if you didn't know, listen closely, they are patterns, significant patterns that inform the narrative. Because in the course of reading all these feasts, we have tours from Capernaum and back. A tour is something where Jesus leaves Capernaum because he moved there, that's his new headquarters, and only he returns later. And I saw that happening over and over again. So I said, well, that's a tour. And lo and behold, there were 13. It was the last tour, took the rest of his ministry because he ends up in Jerusalem. And he does return to Capernaum. Well, he doesn't say, it's on the edge of the Sea of Galilee. At the end. So that's his last tour. All right. This allows us, by the way, to do something interesting. We can place events according to the tours in which they are found. So the Sermon on the Mount was on his second tour. First, he got his disciples that he retrieved after John's arrest. And then after that, we have, I went to Nazareth, and then we have the Sermon on the Mount, number 2. And then we move over, and on the 5th one, we have the paralytic through the roof. It actually happens, not a metaphor. And so we have these tours, and we come up to 12, and then 13 is a very long one. And then you can locate ministry events, and we're going to look at 4 and 5. And the reason is that tour number 4 sets up tour number 5. All right, so we move over here. We'll be looking at the leper through the roof. His willfulness, we will notice. From a leper's willfulness to a paralytic's healing. A closer look at tours 4 and 5. We really need to look at characters before we dive into a narrative of events. And John the Baptist, who is no longer with us at that point, he's in jail awaiting his eventual execution. He doesn't know that he's going to die there, but that's what happens. He's a Levite priest. It's important to understand that. He's Jesus' forerunner now in jail. When the Messiah was coming, the tribe of Levi was going to present him. And John the Baptist was a Levite priest assigned to that task. And the Levites themselves, as a tribe, they were Israel's priestly tribe. They were teachers of the law, and they were reluctant to continue John's mission. They never show up when he's in jail. That's bad for business. And that introduces us really to the leper. There's actually 2 lepers of interest to us. One is right after the Sermon on the Mount. This is not that guy. That fellow, as far as we know, did everything he was asked to do by Jesus, and there was no problem with him. But the second leper here is going to be, he has some mischief in him. We're going to find out. But the leper, as such, can't invite himself into society. If you could get well by yourself, and that happens according to Leviticus, you still cannot enter. A priest has to come and certify the obvious. And then, after that, you can say, oh, if you're a leper, I'm free to go. He says, no, you're not. You cannot mingle with anyone. Oh, well, why can I? He says, come with me. Part 2 is the sanctuary. We had 2 birds, 2 doves we sacrificed outside the camp, and then we go inside the camp to the sanctuary. And there, not only will the priest, like myself, they will speak on behalf of God directly. That sacrifice will say, you're clear, you're clean to go. It's a justification ceremony. And it has a lot to do with John the Baptist's ministry. It's a way to understand what he was doing, baptizing people like he was. Now, some other parties to be keeping in mind are the crowds. Here, when we come touch down into the narrative, the crowds enjoy Jesus' teaching, but they enjoy his healings even more. They have priorities too. And then the religious leaders, a specific word about them, they are usurpers. They are self-appointed teachers of the law. They inserted themselves. In fact, you've heard it said Jesus about the Sermon on the Mount. Well, who was telling them that? Their leaders. But who was actually providing the information in the original teaching were the Levites. So the crowds, the religious leaders, we could call all these change agents because the story moves around them. And then we have the Son of Man. This is a title that Jesus uses in this story to identify himself. We know him. He's the Son of God. You won't hear that in this story. You hear something else. And the paralytic, he was lowered through the roof. We'll make a comment here about what that meant. So we're about to introduce ourselves into tour number 4 and tour number 5. The handout has all the words that are missing here. This is I was told you could not see 9-point type in a PowerPoint. I actually believe that now. And so the person that was helping me took my chart, wiped out all the words, and put the main ideas into the chart, and it was a gift from God. So I had no problem agreeing with that. So on the handout, you'll see all the words, but here we have the ideas isolated. Now, I call it the willful leper, and you'll see why. When Jesus healed this leper here, he says, in Mark and Luke, he says, tell only the priest. This leper has better ideas. He says to the crowds, everything. Jesus said, don't say a word. Don't talk to anyone on the way. He says, modest fellow. And so he goes and he brags about Jesus, and of course it's true. And there's so many people that Jesus can't enter a city. A lot of little cities around there. He cannot go into the city. Here is something that Jesus cannot do because of someone disobeying what he said to do. Well, in the narrative, the next story is missing in Mark and Luke because Matthew chimes in with something we need to know. He sails away from the crowd, and there's a storm at sea. You may have heard that in Matthew 8. But what it is, he's thinning the crowds. The crowds are a problem? No problem. He sails across, there's a storm, poof, he's gone, they don't know where he is. And when he comes back, we have this wonderful result. There's a reset. Jesus is now able to go to his own home. He had relocated to Capernaum, if you didn't know. And the religious leaders that are on site at the place, and the crowds are now outside listening. He was able to navigate all that because he got rid of the problem that this leper had caused for him. And there's no healing as yet. He's in his house teaching. Well, evidently, the healing is not his first priority. And outside, there were plenty of people who disagreed with that. Why is he talking to those leaders? All right. So he freely enters in the tour. That's tour 4 set up, and then tour 5 is now he's thinned the crowds. He freely enters Capernaum as his headquarters, and that's because the word got out. The only way to get inside the house, if you're outside the house, is by an act of vandalism. Tell me, if you had someone over for dinner and somebody chopped through the ceiling, you would not be happy. I paid for that. But that's not how Jesus felt about that. It's just the principle of the thing. He was inside the house. He didn't want them to break and enter. But they did. First, in Matthew, we just read that the friends ported the paralytic on a bed to Jesus. No harm there. How did they get to him? Well, they dug open the roof. And if you read the story carefully, they made sure they centered him right in between the bad guys and Jesus. So while Jesus is talking, we have a physical object in between him and everybody he's talking to. So that's the situation here. The paralytic is not simply entering the house and being healed. Matthew leaves that part off, that he invaded the house. But that's okay. There's something else Matthew is working on. We'll see that shortly. And then the words at the bottom, rise, take up your bed. I say, take up your pallet and go home and stretcher. We'll be showing those what's going on there. Healing matters to Jesus. And so does forgiveness. Because what he next does, he forgives this nervous paralytic. I mean, think of it this way. What happens when a dog catches the car it's been chasing? He got it. He's inside. And now what? And Jesus seems to have, his first words are, well, take courage, my son, your sins are forgiven. Any idea what sins he might have had in mind? We know of one for a fact. He broke into his house. He went along, oh, it wasn't his fault, fine. He went along with the schemes of other people. Yeah, I'm good for, you know. The end justifies the means. That's his thought process. And so he says, take courage, my son. That's because he's got nervous feelings about this whole thing. My son, oh, he's repeating that. I like that part, he says to the paralytic says to himself, your sins are forgiven. That part I don't understand. Your friend, oh, friend, your sins are forgiven you. Christ is making him feel at home here. You see, his priorities are not the healing. He's going to deal with the man's sins first. That's the first order of business. Now, what happens is that the leaders object. And they say these words, this fellow blasphemes. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Who can forgive sins but God alone? I'm sure if you're a former Pharisee, you understand, okay, we don't want to accuse anybody here, but if you're a former Pharisee, this makes perfectly good sense back in the day. But what happens, they're making it up that God alone can forgive sins. How do we know? Because that's what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. When you're going to pray, be sure you forgive others, otherwise God will not listen to you. You can do that. You can forgive other people. And so, in order for Jesus to deal with this man, he clears the deck of a problem. He broke into my house. And you say, was it his house? Well, yes, he moved to Capernaum. That's his headquarters. Now, the leaders, when they object, they don't want to be involved in managing conflicts. The arrogant usurpers of Levitical position, you've heard it said, they're very disruptive. So he resets the situation and he says this, basically, why dwell on evil in your hearts? What evil? You forgave this guy. Why dwell on such things in your hearts? Why debate these things? Because they were going at it. You can see their faces. In your hearts. They weren't chatty about it. No. So he says, why work so hard to find it wrong for one man to forgive another? What's wrong with you people? Now, we move along. He has a sorting question. He wants to sort out the situation so they can understand it. He says, here's a question for you. It shouldn't be that hard to figure out. Which is easier to say? Your sins are forgiven, or to say, rise and walk? It's actually kind of a trick question, if you think about it. But as far as words go, talk is cheap. The answer is that a miracle could sort this problem out. And we're about to see one. He says, it takes authority to forgive sins on earth. And the Son of Man has this authority, as you will soon find out. In order that you may know, the Son of Man, that green bar across there, that he has authority on earth to forgive sins, I'm going to do something to justify my having forgiven him in the first place. Rise, take up your bed, take up your pallet, take up your stretcher, and go home. And the paralytic doesn't even know he's part of the conversation here. He was dropped in. Now, here's a pop quiz. Which one of these things that you see here in the bottom row did Jesus say first? I mean, he's got three different things here, and they're not the same. He says, upon rising, take up your bed and go home. I say to you, rise, take up your pallet and go home. I say to you, rise, and taking up your stretcher, go home. The tenses, the subordination of clauses, nothing's the same. He doesn't even have the same word for his conveyance. It's a bed, a pallet, and a stretcher, according to how it looked to the eye, or its purpose. The only thing that's the same in all three statements is go home. There's nothing else the same. Now, why is he repeating himself? Well, if you imagine, you've just been lowered through the roof, it took a lot of nerve. The people in the audience ignore any value to him being there whatsoever. And when Jesus said, I forgive, your sins are forgiven, they beef about this as a problem. And the paralytic is on the floor going, great, I've always wanted to be forgiven of my sins, laying here paralyzed, while other people argue. He doesn't even know what's going on. So he says, in order that you may know, to the bad guys, and he addresses the leper, I call him the leper, my bet. He addresses the paralytic, who does not know he's being addressed, because he simply interrupted himself to say it. And which one of these interrupts himself is the first one? There is no addressing the paralytic. He says, upon rising, take up your bed and go home. Why do you repeat yourself? If you have children, you know. If you have a boss, you know. People repeat themselves when they don't think you're listening. So he says, I'm talking to you. Oh. And he says it twice more. Well, if you put it like that, why, do you know he was already well? You can't get up unless you're well. He said, rise, take up your bed and go. So that's what he did. He interrupted his challenge to the leaders to instruct the paralytic without cueing him in, and we have all this. I put the literal renderings down there so you could see all the variety of the things that he said. Participles, commands, and all that. Nothing's the same except go home. So he has switched who he's talking to from the leaders, and he is talking to the paralytic. And once he cues this man in, using a variety of terms, we have it clear what he's to do. And it goes like this. He rose. And he went home. And immediately, that means when the bell rang, he took up the pallet and he went out in the sight of all. And he went and took up what he'd been lying on. He went home glorifying God. I was telling this to a pastor. He was curious about the story. I said, you have people like this in church. Well, I mean, they're not paralytics, but they nod their head when you're preaching, and they don't know that God is talking to them. So they just stay like they are. This is a metaphor for the situation we're in this world. Now, if you don't know then the lesson, if you don't know God is talking to you, you won't respond. But he has a way of getting his point across. Now, there are three responses. They're listed here. Two parties, but there's three responses listed. And who was it that actually understood what was going on? The multitude saw this, they were filled with awe, and they glorified God who had given such authority to, what's that word? Men. Us. We can forgive our neighbor. We just don't have to live like the way we've been living. And it'll get rid of some problems. As for the leaders, we have religious voodoo. Oh, we are all amazed. Yes, we are. We've never seen anything like this. Next. All right. They were filled with fear. They're going to be held accountable. They don't know where he's going with this. So the upshot of the story, only the crowd gets it right. He was God, and he did things that God can do. But he said, this is what people can do. He forgave him as one man forgives another. The Son of God is his name for his deity, but Son of Man has to do with his role among people. And he's going to judge the world as the Son of Man. That's why he says the Son of Man has authority on earth, because when he raises people from the dead, he's not going to come in on his divine status. Oh no, he's going to come in as the Son of Man. Don't talk to me. I know you. And there will be no excuse. Now, in sum, our selections focused on the history in the text and not of the text. We found the narratives were written in consecutive chronological order. They are fully complementary in ways you might not have realized. That Jesus went over here and thinned the crowds. That only comes up if you're reading a narrative. You can't even see that. Fully complementary. The order of temptations in the wilderness, he thinned the crowds, and a series of verbal instructions to the paralytic. They're all necessary. His discrete instructions to the paralytic, we used to call these things a crux interpretum, for those that have any idea what that is. It means a critical point. And what it does, it establishes an idea in real life. This combination, unique, so far as I know, in its complexity, simplicity, and coherence, serves as a benchmark and objective test of the chronological ordering principles guiding the Gospels throughout. I have a final thought. I actually wrote this out, this part of the story, and sent it to Dr. Ryrie. Now, you know, Dr. Ryrie's been dead for a while. When I sent it to him, it was the year 2000. And he liked what I had. And he said, I see, because I asked him about publishing, and he said, I see you're almost done. You're in Matthew 9. And I was crushed. What he didn't know was that was the only part of the harmony in English. I was nowhere near being able to publish. But he was very encouraging. He says, this should never be allowed to go out of print once it's in print. So he said, and in fact, his first words were, I'm overwhelmed. Because he saw how many different things would have to be redone to give authenticity to our preaching in the Gospels. Anyway, I appreciate your time. The paralytic story is like an all-time favorite on the authority of the Scriptures. Thank you.